Tigges Coleman from Lutheran Community Services with Seattle, Zach Reiber from Lutheran Community Services Northwest as well in Spokane, and then Dorothy McCabe from Catholic Community Services in the Pierce County, Tacoma, Vancouver area. And one thing I wanted to note before we get started is there will be a brief survey that we send out at the end of this webinar. So as soon as this webinar ends, you'll get a screen that pops up to ask you to take a brief survey, and please fill out this survey. Let us know if you have other webinar topics that you're interested in or anything from this webinar that you want to clarify. We will pass on that information to the panelists at the end. And feel free during this webinar to ask your questions. I will be monitoring the chat box as well as the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box, and I will flag that for the presenters this afternoon. Okay, so to start us off, Tigges is going to give a quick overview.
Thank you, Donna. Hi, my name is Tigges Coleman, and I am one of the clinical program managers at Lutheran Community Services. My apologies in advance for my voice. I got sick just today, so I'm doing my best to make sure that you can all hear me, but let me know if I need to speak a little louder. This training is designed to provide a general introduction and overview of the Unaccompanied Refugee Minors Program. And I know I want to say that this is a very complex program that works with several outside agencies and systems, and that many parts of this training will probably require additional in-depth explanation, which we probably don't have to go through today. I also want to say that there's a lot of acronyms that will probably be thrown out, but I will try to remember to keep it to a minimum. At the end of this training, you should have a basic understanding of the history and unique needs of unaccompanied refugee minors, and hopefully gain best practice to support the unaccompanied refugee minors in post-secondary programs. Next slide. So the program, just a little bit about the history. In 1979, the United States began resettling refugee children who were separated from family outside their home countries and had no way to return home. From then until about early 1980s, thousands of Vietnamese fled their homes and undertook a risky journey to Thailand, Indonesia, and other countries in Southeast Asia. Therefore, the Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Foster Care Program was created as a way to ensure that children could be resettled to safety as refugees in the United States with the help of foster care programs specially designed to meet their cultural needs. These federally funded programs serve minors admitted to the US who are separated from both parents and are not being cared for by an adult who by law or custom is responsible to do so. And I just want to note that the United States is the only country with a specialized program that provides homes and services to URMs. The two lead voluntary agencies, or VOLAG, helping Office of Refugee Resettlement, or ORR, with the Unaccompanied Refugee Minors, again, URM, programs are Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, so the USCCB. And that Catholic Community Services and Lutheran Community Services Northwest are the two agencies specifically designed to care for URMs, unaccompanied refugee minors, in Washington. And that currently we operate in Seattle, Spokane, Tacoma, and Vancouver. And these agencies are, they identify eligible children in need of URM services, and they provide technical assistance in the reclassification process. They determine appropriate placements for children among their national networks of affiliated agencies, and then we conduct training and research and technical assistance specifically to URM services. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, initially the program served children from Vietnam and Cambodia, but now serves countries throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America, including Burma, Bhutan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Rwanda, Sudan, Liberia, Somalia, DRC, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico. And there's a slew of other countries that I know we've been seeing lately. So just kind of basic, or at least demographic of what we've been seeing. And most are, I just wanted to say that most are teenagers when they arrive, but that sometimes there are younger children as well who are typically part of larger sibling when they come here. Next slide. So as far as eligibility, these are the breakdown of the eligibilities that we're seeing. We have refugees who are overseas refugees youth who have been separated from parents or caregivers. So they've been identified before they get to the US. And then there is victims of trafficking, who are youth identified as victims of human trafficking who also lack a parent or caregivers. Then there is the SIJ, which is the Special Immigrant Juveniles, and these are youth who receive visas while in federal custody. And there's kind of more detail than that, but that's in general what their eligibility is. And then there's also the asylees. Next, please. Let's see, unaccompanied children have multiple, and this is for unaccompanied children, and there have been multiple interrelated reasons for undertaking the difficult journey to the US, which may include rejoining family already here, escaping violent communities or abusive family relationship in their home country, finding work to support their families in the home countries, and that these are, they're especially vulnerable to human trafficking, exploitation, and abuse due to their young age, separation from their parents and relatives, and also the journey that they take to get here. As you can see, there were 3,600 UCs in ORR care as of just recently, actually, January, fiscal year January 20, we got this report in January 2020, which is a huge drop from what we had in the fiscal year 2018. Most have entered the US to reunify with their parents, and an average length of stay that they're staying is about 2 months. And they're initially placed in shelters or foster care before moving on. And we have about 5 facilities in Washington. And when unaccompanied children gain qualifying status, they can then transfer into the URM program, which is the Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program. So although URMs are not in the custody of Children's Administration or in the Division of Children's and Family Services, the programs follow the same laws and regulations and govern domestic foster care. So, you know, social workers are providing intensive case management services for the youth and their foster parents, often for several years, and they're responsible for providing individualized case plans that are responsive to youth's changing wants and needs. Social workers provide and assist youth in accessing health care, counseling services, educational, vocational training, and other resources from the community. We also have, if you go to the next slide, Donna. We also have independent living case managers that our youth work with, that helps them get, they provide individual assessment, they provide goal planning and tracking and skill, and also emphasize on educational planning and career preparation, financial stability, access to healthcare, stable housing, and also reliable and appropriate transportation. Just really getting them ready to be on their own, because it's hard to come into the US and master the things that they need to be on their own in such a short time. So the independent living case managers are providing services to them to get them ready to be self-sufficient and hopefully transition into being an adult and on their own. Next slide. Then lastly, our youth receive support pursuing post-secondary education, and this is where Zach and Dorothy are going to dive into sort of the best practices that we kind of hopefully can brainstorm together and share with you all. They receive assistance pursuing post-secondary education. You know, we mirror domestic services that our kids can get, like the independent living funds, transitional living funds, and ETV funding. They get FAFSA workshops, they get assistance with kind of breaking down of, you know, how to get ready to be in a different side of educational preparation. So we're doing educational summits. We're talking about talking from getting ready from the high school life into college life. We are, they have access to now governor's scholarship. They are getting College Success Foundation. They're also just recently newly eligible for Passport, and they also have Treehouse Assistance or Treehouse specialists who are also helping them get into the next phase of education. Done on next. That's kind of all. I was trying to rush and make sure that I give kind of the foundation of who and what the overview of the URM program is, and hopefully that can give you some lens of who our kids are. If you have any questions, please feel free to call, feel free to email, or happy to respond to anything.
Okay, so I jump in. As Donna mentioned at the beginning, my name's Dorothy McKay from Catholic Community Services, and Zach is joining me on this part of the presentation from Lutheran Community Services Northwest, just to share a little bit on best practices and lessons learned in terms of support for unaccompanied refugee minors in post-secondary programming. The next slide, please, and one more slide, please, Donna. If you could advance it one more slide, please. So one thing to know in terms of providing additional supports for unaccompanied refugee minors is just kind of recognizing that some of the youth may have difficulty with a sense of belonging to local community for various reasons. So we just want to recognize this, be mindful of this, particularly around age and maturity gap. So youth are often much older than their peers due to them needing to make up for lost time in the education system. A lot of the youth may have had educational gaps in their background, and so they're really working hard to try and close those gaps and earn those credits to advance on their educational path. So often what we're seeing is that youth are much older than their peers. Additionally, they have lived experiences which have either forced them to kind of grow up much faster or take care of others and taking on those responsibilities at a very young age. Or maybe perhaps due to trauma, youth may actually demonstrate a younger social developmental age, just according to when those traumas might have occurred for them in the past. So sometimes there can kind of be these disconnects or difficulties maybe in connecting with their peers on the same level, particularly if there has been a lack of common experiences. So and able to make those connections with the peers, there's unique social challenges in the sense that, you know, some of the youth may have not had sort of the shared history or shared home experiences that others may have. Or there may not be this sort of sense of common knowledge, because those are all things that are culturally informed. So, for example, the idea of stranger danger, or, you know, having our individualistic kind of worldview may be very different from some of the youth coming from different cultures or regions where it is more communal based or collective. And this may kind of come out in others of just youth not really being able to relate to the same way as some of their peers in the education setting. So one area that could be really helpful is becoming more familiarized and helping youth connect with any available student clubs or activities where they might be able to find and make connections with other youth, particularly around shared interests. And if there isn't an existing club, then looking to set up a club or support group for refugee and immigrant youth on campus would be very helpful. Just wanting to note that sometimes the school diversity club isn't necessarily the best fit for some of the refugee and immigrant youth and students. So their experiences may be different than other diverse populations. So being more of a newly arrived population, they may not relate in the same way as some of the other groups in that club. And also to note, even with newly arrived groups or populations, that there could be some underlying conflicts that we may not know about. For example, if there are conflicts between tribes or religious groups from the same country of origin because of some of the history that's there. So really looking to do research to understand some of the country background and history is very helpful. Just to hopefully avoid making assumptions that could be an additional challenge for unaccompanied refugee minors. Also just being mindful of holidays in the United States, as well as those that URMs may practice. So recognizing that holidays, US holidays may be something that youth may not be completely prepared for. So winter breaks, spring breaks, especially if the youth is kind of relying on on-campus housing or meals or things like that, it can be a bit of a challenge for youth during those times. Also looking at doing some research in terms of holidays, customs, or traditions of importance for youth, and recognize how they may want to practice. So for example, during Ramadan, just recognizing the impact of fasting during times of the year, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where there can be times of extended daylight and how that really stretches out that fasting period for students. So just being mindful of that in terms of the impact on attention and focus, as well as just being mindful of maybe not having a class potluck during that time frame, just to be a bit more inclusive. And then additionally, looking at how immigration status can be a factor. So some youth do not have fully adjusted immigration status. So as Tigas outlined before in terms of eligibility, youth are eligible for the Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program through various paths. And some youth may not have a fully adjusted immigration status. So meaning they could have pending work authorization, they may not yet have permanent residency or non-work social security numbers. And this can cause some barriers for youth when trying to apply for scholarships or access financial aid, or even accessing possible post-secondary pathways like paid apprenticeships. And youth may also be struggling to work towards employment or financial independence because of that situation and maybe dealing with those stressors. And then just on that note of stressors, just being mindful of the stress levels of students once they're at that post-secondary level. Recognizing that youth may have additional complex needs and layers of mental health needs, and learning the different layers and overlays for that youth is important to help them access the appropriate services. So looking at situations more holistically, connecting them to any mental health supports that might be on campus, and looking into the various factors. One thing that we have noted that can be an issue is looking at the content of curriculum or assignments, being mindful that there could be some inadvertent trauma triggers or culturally insensitive approaches in the classroom to possibly singling out students that could be from certain regions. So for example, if there was a conversation in class around current global events that were taking place in a region where a youth may be from originally, not put that youth on the spot to be a spokesperson for a group of people or speak to their personal experiences, because that could be a trigger for them. So just being mindful of some of those sensitivities and ways to become further informed to look at some of the needs more holistically. And with that, I will pass it on to Zach.
Hey Zach, before we proceed to the next slide, we did get a question that I think for you all, for Tigges to answer. Do we know why there was such a huge drop in numbers in recent years?
And I don't know if Tigges wants to respond to that. I don't think that all of those numbers are of youth are fully accounted for in the reports. I think we recognize that there were different policy changes that happened. So our programs do get impacted by policies that occur on various levels. And we are a federally funded foster care program, so federal policies impact that as well.
Thank you, Dorothy. I was trying to unmute myself from a cough, but I think you've answered it and how I would have answered it.
Yes, and as we go on to the best practices and access to service, one thing that is really important is take time to understand, or extra time for the youth to understand the system. Because as they go to school or universities, there's a larger system. There's many systems in a larger system. So there's the cashier, this designated support staff, the advising, and there's many different stages inside a larger system. And so kind of helping the youth be able to understand that there are these systems in place, and as a go-to person, whoever is meeting with them, whether it is the designated support staff from Passport, if you are their go-to person, URM youth will create a go-to person. So you are who they will ask questions to. If anything goes on, they'll come and talk to you. And so as being that go-to person and building that rapport to be able to meet with the cashier or take them to go see financial aid, or even to the advisor, and kind of have those face-to-face meetings where they have that person that is trusted, and then they can kind of learn the other different systems inside the larger system. And it really builds that relationship, because throughout their school career, they will be coming to you for questions. And then as you make those face-to-face connections, they will understand, you know, oh, I can reach out to my advisor if I have any questions, and kind of be able to branch out and understand that there's a greater community. And then we also like to kind of advise to create regular meetings, whether it's quarterly or monthly, whichever one is easier, but to be able to continue to have that rapport and let the youth know that, you know, there is someone there for them. There's someone that has their back through this. College can be a very scary time, and for anyone, but to be able to know that someone is there for them. And then help youth with necessary technology. So how to log into the college portal, how to receive emails, and we'll talk about emails in a different slide as well, but receive emails from professors. And so, you know, they may have a personal email, which sometimes they don't check all the time. And then they're learning that they have now a university email. And so kind of how to check this, when to check this, how to use, whether it's Canvas or Blackboard, use these different systems online. And then even when talking about PowerPoints or Word documents to the youth, kind of phrasing it in a more simpler sense, because a lot of the youth don't understand Word documents, because it's just, I mean, growing up in the U.S., you know Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, but maybe phrasing it as the paper, because they write papers in high school. And so to be able to understand that versus, if you get onto Microsoft Word, you can go ahead and type up your paper. So just kind of helping them understand and walk through the technology. Also providing tutoring services. I know a lot of campuses, in fact, I think all campuses, offer tutoring services, and just kind of showing where that is, because there is a education gap for a lot of the youth. And even when they graduate high school, there's still that gap. And to know where the writing lab is, so someone can help you write your paper, or check your paper, where the reading, so someone can help you with comprehension or math or any different classes that they may take. And so kind of understanding where these different services are, and as the go-to person to be able to have that face-to-face interaction and be like, okay, this is where you need to go. And it kind of creates a more comfortable environment as they know that there's these options out there. Also, for a lot of youth, there's a huge fear and a worry for where are they going to live, where are they going to work before going into universities, because college would be great, but I want to have these things taken care of. And so understanding that there is campus housing and work study or jobs on campus, and to be able to utilize that and maybe sign up for that, and to kind of show that there's, whether it's a dorm or whether it's campus apartments or financial aid apartments, where the community connections are and who they can go to. Again, it's about building a community, and I think that is something that really helps the URM youth, along with every youth. And then if your school provides it, to do mandatory study skills class, because as they are catching up in grades, or even in the education gaps, to know that there are other people too that might be in the same spot, and to be able to build the connections and to be able to grow that way as they progress through their school. Yeah.
So then continuing on and looking at best practices, I think it's helpful. I think what Zach was just kind of speaking to really highlights as well that we recognize for a lot of our youth, the transition to post-secondary pathways can be a particular challenge, regardless of how youth might have performed through their secondary education. That transition now to these post-secondary level sort of expectations can be that extra challenge. And so our hope is that some of these lessons learned or best practices, and maybe the techniques that you guys are already utilizing, are really helping keeping youth engaged. And so being able to take extra time to really orient youth different roles of the educational staff who can help them along the way, and helping to introduce youth to instructors and educators to really encourage youth to get to know their instructors. These things may not necessarily be something that are kind of inherently known for youth, because they may have had a lack of exposure to these sorts of support services or educational opportunities, because they may not have even been exposed to those systems or know what sort of supports are out there. For example, any sort of special education services or school counseling. And they may not even know what to ask for, just for lack of being exposed to those sorts of supports prior to coming here. And so all of these recommendations may seem a bit like extreme hand-holding for the age of our youth, but really being able to build youth's comfort level with educators and instructors can be a major factor in their ability to succeed in the classroom. It will improve their ability to ask for help when they need it. It would help to have modeling of how to communicate problems or challenges, and having more time with college coaches, designated support staff, advocates, peer navigators is really helpful to kind of help make those connections and keep a youth moving through and towards their educational goals. One thing to note about peer navigators, and just being mindful to not make assumptions of a student's comfort level, maybe with a particular peer navigator. It is always great to make additional cultural connections for youth, but just an example would be not necessarily assuming that perhaps a female Somali student may necessarily be comfortable being matched with a male Somali student. You know, for example, that student may want to distance themselves from community members for some reason, or there may be other triggering factors to consider. So with all the information we're presenting today, it's really just food for thought, and also a reminder to just sort of be holistic in looking at situations and not making assumptions, but to really check in with youth and their comfort levels along the way. Another thing to note, just in terms of best practice and looking at perspectives on education, is to really help youth understand the educational or experiential steps needed to reach their goals. Sometimes youth may be confused about the different higher education systems or an associated process, so they may not fully understand that there may be different pathways or requirements for different careers. For example, what type of education or experience is needed for different jobs. You know, some careers require a BA, an AA, a master's or certificate, or it could be a completely different path like police academy. So spending time with youth to understand their goals and explaining possible options or pathways. And really this takes time to engage in conversation, to find out what the youth hopes to accomplish, and really unpacking where their interests are. So for example, if a youth said that they would like to become a nurse because that is one of the careers that they've been exposed to before, because they want to help people. But in talking with the youth, they may not even be interested in that sort of daily work of medical procedures. They may have an aversion to bodily fluids, or youth may express that really their interest is really in helping people. And they may also talk about liking to work with children. So talking to them about even exploring different pathways like early childhood education, or explaining what possible careers look like, can be really helpful, particularly by explaining in very concrete terms what the scope of work looks like for different career areas, and giving specific examples of job duties or daily tasks to help youth visualize what that might look like, or get exposed to different options for themselves that they may not have even been aware of as something to consider. And then also talking with youth about the different ways that they may be able to accomplish their goals. So really clarifying those expectations and the process, helping to explain that there aren't any shortcuts. And it can be really helpful in that process to taking the time to really review an academic plan or educational plan for that degree or certificate that they're looking to work towards, and really map it out for them so they can see and visualize what that path would look like for them.
Yes, and on that, for keeping communication simple. And so a lot of our youth, sometimes, I mean, English is not the first language. And so to be able to just keep it simple, and if you can communicate, we would recommend probably via text, because it's easier to read if they don't understand the text. A lot of times you can now put it into, just copy it and put it into Google Translate, and to be able to understand it that way. And so it makes communication simple, but still try to limit it to one instruction at a time. Just keep it short and simple. Phone calls, a lot of youth, when doing phone calls, you can't see the other person on the line. And so it's hard to read body language or kind of get any other cues. And so we kind of recommend, if you do phone calls, kind of do that as almost a last resort, or just kind of being aware of that. So if you are calling the youth, that it is it's hard to be able to understand if you're just listening and just trying to comprehend via listening. And we also recommend face-to-face is very effective, and especially if there's something very important, to be able to meet face-to-face, because then the youth has you in front of them so they can ask any questions. They don't have to go off of text or a phone call, and they can read any cues, but also be able to ask for clarification if need be. And so that's very important, very powerful for the youth to have that face-to-face. Try to avoid, or at least as a follow-up, to do email. And so a lot of youth aren't accustomed to checking an email every day. And then when you put in a personal email and then a school email and you put all this in the mix, they're not always accustomed to checking their email every day. And so maybe doing that as a follow-up to a meeting. So say you met face-to-face with youth, and then, hey, it was good to meet with you. Here's the points that we talked about. If you have any questions, go ahead and contact me. But that way it's not as, this is the way I can get a hold of them because this is important. It's as a follow-up of, this is what we went through. We already went that, but now you can get accustomed to checking your email. And through time, it progresses. And so, just kind of for separate steps and bullet is really effective. Use bullet points, and this is one step to do. This is what we did also. And kind of keep communication simple.
So are there any questions? We'll keep an eye out for the chat box and Q&A. Okay. Question we have is, Becca works with youth who was able to get FAFSA due to having a social security number, but does not qualify for federal student loans. The student applied to the Seattle Promise scholarship program, but there are other scholarships are there other scholarships that Becca can guide the student towards who is earning an associate's degree? Should the student fill out the FAFSA? And the student is has currently applied to Seattle Central College and South Seattle College.
You want me to, I could jump in first on that. So I think without knowing more details about the student, typically, we need to usually not only work on trying to complete the FAFSA for our youth, but also if they do not, if they're not eligible to receive any federal financial aid, then we're also having youth complete the WASPA to see if that is a possible avenue for youth to receive financial assistance as another element. Is this a youth that's in foster care? Is this a foster youth? And maybe you already said that and I missed it.
Students in extended foster care.
Okay, so they should also be able, now again, without knowing all the specifics of the youth, but it sounds like they would be eligible to apply then for passport as well, and then also additional scholarships I know that we have youth that apply for the Governors and Leadership Scholarships as well. Connecting with the financial aid office at the local school to see if there's additional scholarship opportunities. And then we usually have youth sign up for the dashboard accounts too. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the full.
Through WASAC.
Yeah, which have all been helpful, at least in our experience.
Yeah, and Becca, I think this is a kind of student-specific question, so I'm happy to follow up as a CSF staff with you on understanding just what the resources are, particularly for the students. So maybe offline, if you wanted to email the passport@collegesuccessfoundation.org email, we can follow up individually. Any other general questions?
And Donna, maybe if there are more questions coming in, perhaps you could advance it one more to our resource slide.
Yep.
Kind of take a look at that too.
Mm-hmm.
We collectively put some information together around more trauma-informed care and approaches offered through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Also some information on cultural guides, as well as some information on additional resettlement agencies in a lot of the main regions. I know also Clark has Lutheran Community Services as well, and being able to reach out to local resettlement agencies to develop a better knowledge locally can really help in utilizing them for technical assistance as well.
And the presenters did forward a few resources over to our team, so we will send that out after this webinar. And then this webinar is recorded, so it'll also be uploaded onto our Washington Passport Network YouTube channel, so you can view this at a later time if you wanted to look back at some of the content that was covered. Okay, it looks like we got one more. Oh, nope, just a comment. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. Well, thank you so much to the presenters, Dorothy, Zach, and Tigges, for joining us this afternoon, for preparing this material and sharing it out with our Washington Passport Network. Thanks for everyone for joining us this afternoon. Again, this will be uploaded, and a brief survey will pop up on your screen as soon as this webinar is over. And then a couple of announcements that I wanted to just share with you all of upcoming events. So we have one more webinar scheduled in our series for this year. It's on March 11th, and it's about tribal foster youth. So you can register for that webinar on the WPN website in our events calendar. You can find the Zoom URL there. And I'll also send out an email about this upcoming webinar in the coming weeks as well. And then the big event that we have towards the end of this year, it's April 28th and 29th is our annual Washington Passport to Career State Conference. This year we'll be at the Greater Tacoma Convention Center. We're really excited to reconvene everyone in the network. More information can be found on the WPN website. Registration is set to open later today. So if you have any questions about how to register, agenda for the workshop, all of that will be added on the website soon. As of right now, we have information just about the conference and then accommodations. And we are also looking for presenters for the conference. So there will be a link on the website for folks to submit a request for proposal to present. We are looking for 24 workshops to be filled this year. Got a lot of great feedback about the workshops last year, so we're hoping for just same level of workshops at the conference this year. And if you have any questions about if you're on the fence and you are thinking about presenting or have questions about the process, we are holding 2 information sessions next week on February 20th from 10 to 11 a.m. and February 26th from 2 to 3 p.m. And Essence and I will just be online standing by. If you wanted to join, it's opt-in. You can hang out with us for the full hour or just to ask a quick question. And we're here to help brainstorm with you on a topic, or if you just have a question about how to set up your proposal for the workshop. And you can always email our team at passport@collegesuccessfoundation.org. Those are all the announcements that I have. We really hope to see a lot of you at the conference this year, April 28th and 29th. And again, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Thank you again to the webinar presenters. We'll see you next month. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.